The email that destroyed my boss arrived at 3:17 p.m. on a Tuesday, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. They clapped for him again. I was sitting 3 seats down from the coffee machine, half listening to Austin's quarterly performance call while staring at a spreadsheet that had been perfect since Tuesday morning. "Let's give a round of applause to Jake," our boss said, like he was announcing a Purple Heart recipient instead of a guy whose biggest accomplishment was knowing which emoji to use in Slack messages. Jake closed the Mountain West Credit Union deal and exceeded all KPIs. "Outstanding work, man." Everyone cheered like they hadn't watched Jake panic in the break room for 2 weeks straight, asking what the difference was between fraud detection and fraud prevention. Meanwhile, I built the entire back-end architecture for that rollout. I trained the junior developers, stayed up until 2 a.m. debugging the transaction monitoring system when it kept flagging legitimate transfers as suspicious. Jake once pushed a test environment live during peak banking hours and somehow still walked away with a bonus and a corner office. Me? I got a $15 Amazon gift card and a "we'll circle back next quarter" from Austin Brooks. My name is Dan Parker, I'm 49 years old, and I've been putting up with this garbage for 15 years. I make $84,000 a year after a decade and a half of building systems that keep this place running. Austin, who's 42 and wears hoodies with startup logos he's never worked for, calls every man over 45 chief like it's a compliment instead of condescension. "You're such a rock, Dan," Austin told me after the call, flashing that MBA smile. "Everyone leans on you. I know a promotion's overdue, but budget constraints. You get it, right?" I smiled back. The kind of smile you wear like Kevlar. Because if you show weakness, they'll pile more responsibility on your desk and call it a growth opportunity. This was the 4th time in 3 years that budget constraints seemed to only apply to me and not to the guys who spent half their workday arguing about crypto and fantasy football. That night, I closed my work laptop like it was a casket and opened my real machine, my personal setup, my sanctuary. I wasn't going to complain. I wasn't going to update my LinkedIn with passive-aggressive quotes about leadership. I was going to build. My private repository was waiting like a loaded weapon. The real-time fraud detection system I'd been quietly developing for the past 14 months glowed on the screen. Modular, efficient, battle-tested, and completely untraceable to company resources. Every line of code written on my own hardware, after hours, in a corner booth at Denny's, or under the kitchen light while reheating leftover pizza. I didn't need Austin's permission to matter. Listen, if you've ever been passed over for promotion by someone half your age, or watched incompetence get rewarded while your experience gets taken for granted, this story's for you. Because sometimes the old dog has been learning new tricks all along. I'd been sitting on a prototype for an AI-driven fraud detection engine that could analyze transaction patterns in real time with fewer false positives than Austin had excuses. It started as a side project after our 3rd restructuring in 5 years. Then it got serious. 2 years ago, I'd pitched something similar to Rocky Mountain Credit Union. They liked the concept but said our company's solution wasn't sophisticated enough. Said we were thinking too small. Fine. That lit a fire under me that's been burning ever since. Every ignored raise request became a new feature. Every time Austin said, "You're just so dependable," like it was a compliment instead of a cage, I refined the algorithm. I'd wake up at 5 a.m. to run stress tests before work, spend weekends analyzing false positive rates. I wasn't bitter, I was busy. Busy building the exit ramp they thought I'd never take. The system I called Sentinel was beautiful. Clean code, elegant architecture, military precision in every module. Sentinel didn't care about Austin's quarterly metrics or office politics. Sentinel monitored transaction flows in real time, flagged suspicious patterns before they became problems, and adapted based on historical data and behavioral analysis. Basically, Sentinel did what our entire fraud team did, but without the ego and internal politics. I hosted everything on private cloud servers, paid for with my own money. Paranoid maybe, but I'd seen our legal department try to claim ownership of someone's open source contributions just because he'd used company Wi-Fi to download updates. Not me. I didn't even check personal email from the office network. Progress was methodical, but it was mine. Every bug fixed felt like reclaiming territory I'd lost over the years. By December, I had a working prototype. By February, a pilot-ready system that could handle real-world transaction volumes. Then came March, And everything changed. Rocky Mountain Credit Union reached out again. Patricia Martinez, their new CTO, sent an email that made my heart race. Dan, hope you remember our conversation from 2 years ago. We're implementing new fraud prevention infrastructure and wondered if you'd be interested in a small-scale pilot. Nothing formal, just a 2-month test. If it performs well, we'll discuss licensing. I stared at that email for 20 minutes, reading it over and over. This was it. The moment I'd been working toward for more than a year. But I was still on payroll at a company that loved to claim ownership over every breath I took during business hours and sometimes after. So I did what any good soldier does when facing uncertain territory. I checked my intel. I dug out my original employment agreement from 15 years ago, when the company was smaller and HR was less aggressive about intellectual property claims. Page 4, Section 8.2, Veteran Employment Protection Addendum. Employee retains full rights to intellectual property developed independently during non-compensated hours using personal resources. It was like finding a hidden escape route in enemy territory. I printed that page, highlighted it 3 times, and slipped it into the red folder where I kept every performance review, every ignored request, every email where HR used phrases like, "We value your dedication while offering nothing concrete." 15 years of documentation, building a case I never thought I'd need to make. They didn't know about my side project. They didn't know I'd been building an escape plan in silence, one algorithm at a time. But they were about to find out. The key to success is making your ambition look like burnout. I started leaving exactly at 5 p.m. No more staying late to fix other people's sloppy code. No more answering Teams messages at 11 p.m. because Austin just had a quick question. I became boring on purpose. No more volunteering for weekend deployments. No more quick fixes before client demos. Dan must be getting tired, they whispered. He used to be so committed. Sure, that's what it looked like. But every hour I stopped giving them, I invested in myself. Evenings became sacred. I'd flip my phone face down, stuff my work laptop under a pile of bills, and boot up my personal machine. I had a routine now. Coffee, focus music, and pure concentration. The project I called Sentinel wasn't just code anymore. It was my ticket out. I sent Patricia a clean deployment package and detailed documentation. 3 hours later, she replied, "Looks impressive. Starting pilot next week. Off the record, I'm rooting for you. I didn't tell anyone. Not HR, not my closest colleague, not even my wife, Sarah. Because here's what I learned in the Army. The moment people like Austin think you have something better going on, they'll find a way to make it theirs." My contract was like an old field manual, full of standard clauses and bureaucratic language, but I knew the one section that mattered. Section 8.2. I'd read it 50 times by then, but that night I read it again. Employee retains full rights to intellectual property developed independently during non-compensated hours using personal resources. Every time I read it, it got sweeter. The CEO at the time had been a veteran himself, and this clause was his way of protecting people like us. Austin had inherited it when he took over, probably never bothering to read the fine print. His loss, my gain. I printed it again, highlighted the key phrase in yellow, underlined the critical sentence in red, and added it to my documentation folder. That folder was getting thick. Screenshots of Slack conversations where Austin took credit for my work. Emails where HR promised future opportunities while delivering nothing, presentations I'd ghostwritten that earned other people bonuses. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. There's a difference between being bitter and being done. And I was done waiting for someone else to recognize my value. We landed the Southwestern Banking Consortium account on a Thursday. It was huge, a multi-state credit union network worth $2.3 million over 3 years. My team pulled it off. I'd spent 4 months rebuilding their transaction monitoring infrastructure, integrating legacy systems that hadn't talked to each other since the Clinton administration, and training their staff on procedures that actually made sense. How did Austin announce it during the all-hands call? "I want to give a shout-out to everyone who contributed to this victory," he said, leaning back like a proud Little League coach. "Lots of moving parts, but that's what teamwork looks like." Then he winked at the VP on the Zoom call. I muted my microphone and stared at my keyboard like it owed me money. I'd written the implementation plan, mapped every integration point, and personally walked their IT director through the deployment. But sure, everyone contributed. The VP nodded approvingly. "Excellent leadership, Austin. This is exactly what we need from your department. My phone buzzed with a Teams message from HR. Hey Dan, just a heads up. We're onboarding your new team member, Sophia Brooks. Can you get her set up Monday? Also, salary-wise, she's starting at $52,000. Just FYI, since she'll be working closely with you. I stared at that message for a full minute. $52,000 for Sophia. Sophia, who'd misspelled algorithm in her cover letter. Sophia, who asked during her interview if she could work remotely on Fridays because that's her self-care day. Sophia was making 62% of my salary after 0 days of experience. Oh, and Sophia? She's Austin's 22-year-old daughter, fresh out of college with a communications degree and daddy's protection. While I've got a mortgage payment, 2 kids thinking about college, and a retirement account that's not where it should be at 49. I didn't respond to the message, didn't storm into HR, didn't even finish my lukewarm coffee. I just opened Sentinel and got back to work. 4 hours later, my personal email chimed. Patricia again. Pilot exceeded all expectations. Board approved full implementation. We're officially your first major client. Let's discuss licensing terms next week. First major client. I leaned back in my chair and watched the cursor blink on my screen. It felt alive. 1 client, 1 product, 0 permissions requested from the people who'd been holding me back for 15 years. I should have felt victorious, but all I felt was pressure. Like I was holding a live grenade with the pin halfway out. Because I knew the moment this went public, the moment anyone at Pinnacle caught wind of what I'd built, they'd come for it. Austin would pivot from, "You've been quiet lately," to, "We're launching this together, right?" Faster than he abandoned group lunches when the bill came. HR would dust off some ancient clause about collaborative innovation. Legal would claim my home office belonged to the company because I once took a work call from my kitchen table. I wasn't ready for war. Not yet. But I was close. That night, I made a checklist. Not a vision board, not a business plan. A checklist. Verify all Sentinel backups on independent servers. Scrub any trace data from work systems. Set up third-party timestamp verification. Confirm contract language with employment attorney. Draft public announcement. It was coming. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but eventually someone in that building would realize I wasn't the quiet workhorse anymore. I was the fuse under their foundation, and they were still holding the match. The attorney consultation went better than expected. Jennifer Walsh, employment law specialist, reviewed my contract in her downtown office while I sat across from her mahogany desk like I was planning a military operation. Which, in a way, I was. "This veteran protection clause is ironclad," she said, tapping section 8.2 with her pen. "Whoever drafted this knew what they were doing. As long as you can prove independent development with no company resources, you're bulletproof." "I've got server logs, timestamps, everything documented," I told her. "Good. Keep those backups safe, and whatever you do, don't discuss this at work until you're ready to go public." I wasn't planning to. But sometimes plans change. 2 weeks later, Rocky Mountain's pilot results came back. Not just good, exceptional. 97% accuracy rate, 60% reduction in false positives, processing speeds that made their old system look like a Model T. Patricia called personally. "Dan, I've never seen anything like this. We want to license Sentinel for our entire network. I'm talking about a 3-year deal worth $1.8 million. Can you handle that scale?" I could barely keep my voice steady. "Yes, I can handle it. There's one thing. Our board wants to meet next month. They'll want to verify you're not violating any employment agreements. Can you provide documentation?" Absolutely. I had section 8.2 ready to frame. That afternoon, I made the decision. It was time to go public, but I'd do it my way. Professional, clean, no drama. Just a simple LinkedIn announcement that would change everything. I posted it with steady hands. Not a product launch extravaganza, not a press release, just a single professional sentence. Excited to announce the launch of Sentinel Fraud Detection. Grateful to early adopters who believed in the vision. That was it. No hashtags, no company mention, no reference to Austin or the 15 years I'd spent holding their operation together. Just a quiet announcement, a whisper that would become a roar. I closed my laptop and made dinner, thinking maybe 20 people would engage, friends being polite, a few industry contacts showing support. By the time I finished eating, there were 127 comments. "Wait, you built this yourself? Been following your work since the banking conference. Incredible execution. Showed this to my CTO last month. Game changer for fraud prevention. Our credit union needs this. Can we discuss partnership?" The DMs started flooding in. 5 journalists, including one from Banking Technology Weekly that had ignored my cold email 3 years ago. 3 startup podcasters, 2 VC firms I'd never heard of. One message that made my heart race. Saw your announcement. We've been looking for exactly this solution. Available for a call tomorrow? My phone started buzzing like a fire alarm. Text after text from colleagues who'd seen the post. Then the one I'd been waiting for. Austin. Dan, we need to talk. Urgent. 5 minutes later. Just saw your LinkedIn post. This should have gone through proper channels. Followed by, Dan, call me immediately. The shift was instant, like watching a calm lake turn black under storm clouds. I didn't answer. I didn't even open the message thread. I just silenced my phone and sat back in my kitchen chair, watching the sunset through my window. The transformation was remarkable. For 15 years, I'd been Invisible Dan. Reliable Dan. The guy who fixed things quietly while others took credit. Now, suddenly, I was Dangerous Dan. The guy who might have options they couldn't control. By morning, my inbox looked like a startup founder's dream. 12 serious inquiries from financial institutions, 3 VC firms requesting meetings, a reporter from American Banker wanting an interview, and buried in the middle, one email that made me smile. Dan, this is exactly what community banking needs. Let's talk. Charles Morrison, CEO, Midwest Banking Alliance. Morrison was old-school banking royalty. If he was interested, this was bigger than I'd imagined. But first, I had to survive the corporate inquisition. They didn't even put it on my calendar. No meeting invite, no agenda, just an email from executive administration. Please report to conference room B at 10 a.m. today, per CEO directive. No subject line, no context. It read like a court summons, which I suppose it was. I stared at it for exactly 10 seconds, then calmly walked to my filing cabinet. The red folder came with me. 15 years of documentation, literal and metaphorical receipts. Page 4, Section 8.2 of my original employment agreement, highlighted and ready for battle. Timestamp logs from my personal servers. Screenshots of design documents, each watermarked with dates and times after business hours. For good measure, I included an organizational chart from last year showing Austin had removed my name from client-facing materials without telling me. This wasn't preparation. This was armor. That morning, I wore my best suit. Navy blue, pressed sharp, like dress uniform. No flashy tie, hair-trimmed military short. I looked like someone ready for a court-martial or a job interview. Either way, I was prepared. At 9:59, I walked into conference room B with the confidence of a man who'd read his contract more carefully than the people who'd written it. They were already there, arranged like a tribunal. Austin at the head of the table trying to project authority he'd never earned. 2 board members I barely knew flanking him like bookends. Legal counsel, some expensive suit I'd never seen before, sat across from the empty chair clearly meant for me. The ambush was perfectly choreographed. Too bad for them, I'd been planning this defense for months. Dan, Austin said, fake casual but with an edge that cut through the corporate politeness. Thanks for joining us on short notice. I said nothing, just sat down, placed my red folder on the table, and waited. In the Army, we learned that silence is a weapon. Let the enemy fill the quiet with their own mistakes. You've been busy, Austin continued, that nervous smile twitching at the corners of his mouth like a glitch in his programming. We were surprised to see your announcement yesterday. I waited. Let him dig his own grave. It's raised some concerns internally, mainly around intellectual property and conflict of interest. He dropped the pretense entirely. You developed this while employed here. That makes it company property. We own your code, Chief. One of the board members, a silver-haired man who'd called me sport for 3 years, actually chuckled. Like this was all just a formality before they carved up my life's work. Austin turned to legal like a game show host introducing his secret weapon. Why don't you walk him through what this means legally? The lawyer opened his folder and began speaking in the practiced monotone of corporate enforcement. Words like fiduciary obligation and proprietary overlap floated across the table like smoke from a battlefield. I let him finish every rehearsed syllable. Then, without speaking, I slid my red folder across the table and opened it to page 4. Section 8.2. Highlighted, underlined, time-stamped, signed by both parties 15 years ago. The lawyer glanced down, and his confident expression flickered. He read the clause once, then again, slower this time. Austin kept talking, oblivious to the shift. Look, we're not trying to be punitive here, Dan, but you know how this looks. Developing a competing product while on our payroll. I know exactly how it looks, I said, my voice calm as a mission briefing. That's why everything I built was on personal hardware during non-compensated hours with third-party logging to verify every development timeline. The lawyer was still reading, frowning now. He flipped to the signature page, checked the date, looked back at the clause. Austin leaned forward, desperation creeping into his voice. Dan, come on. You don't really think some old contract clause? You signed it, I said, pointing to section 8.2 with the precision of a targeting laser. Your company's HR department drafted this contract 15 years ago. The CEO at the time was a veteran who believed in protecting people like me. Your signature is on the bottom of page 6. I pulled out a second document. I haven't used company resources, haven't breached confidentiality, haven't violated a single clause of our agreement. I've got server, logs, third-party timestamps, and backup documentation stored in 3 different data centers. The lawyer looked up, not at Austin, but directly at me. For the first time all morning, I saw recognition in his eyes, not just of my legal position, but of who I actually was. The Veteran Protection Addendum, he said quietly. I haven't seen one of these in years. Austin's confident facade cracked like ice in spring. What does that mean? It means, the lawyer said, closing his folder with the finality of a casket lid, that Mr. Parker is on completely solid legal ground. If his documentation supports independent development, which from what I've seen it clearly does, there's no enforceable claim of ownership. The silence in that room was deafening. Austin looked like someone had pulled his spine out through his throat. The board members were no longer smiling. They understood what their lawyer understood. They'd walked into a battle they couldn't win. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, any attempt to pursue this would likely result in significant legal exposure for the company, especially given the veteran protection statutes involved. That's when the door opened and Charles Greer walked in. Chairman of the board, majority stakeholder, the kind of man who wore silence like authority and only spoke when his words could shatter foundations. I'd seen him maybe twice in 15 years, once in an elevator where he'd nodded like I was part of the furniture. Now he stood at the head of the table, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the contract in front of Austin. Gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying the weight of boardroom battles won and lost. I've been listening from outside. Austin tried to salvage something from the wreckage. Charles, we can work this out. Maybe some kind of licensing agreement. No. One word, delivered with the finality of a judge's gavel. We're done here. Charles turned to me. Mr. Parker, I apologize for this misunderstanding. Your contract is clear, your position is solid, and your innovation speaks for itself. He paused, studying me like he was seeing me for the first time in 15 years. We should have recognized your value long ago. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Austin, clear your schedule. We need to discuss your leadership approach. The way he said leadership made it sound like a communicable disease. The board members followed him out without a word. The lawyer packed up his files, avoiding eye contact with everyone. And Austin? Austin sat there like a man watching his empire collapse in real time. I stood up, gathered my documents, and zipped my folder closed. As I reached the door, Austin found his voice one last time. Dan, wait, maybe we can... I turned back. Austin, you had 15 years to treat me like I mattered. All you had to do was see my value instead of taking it for granted. But the company needed me, I corrected. Past tense. I've got 3 VC meetings scheduled this week and a $1.8 million licensing deal already signed. Sentinel's going to help community banks compete with the big guys, and I'm going to make sure they get the tools they deserve. I walked out of that conference room and didn't look back. No dramatic exit speech, no burned bridges, just a quiet departure from a chapter of my life that was finally closed. By noon, I had a text from Patricia Martinez. Board loved the presentation. Contract approved. Welcome to the big leagues, partner. At 49, I'd learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just being so undeniably good at what you do that the people who overlooked you have no choice but to watch you succeed without them. Austin kept his job for exactly 2 more weeks. Me? I kept building.